Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today, getting into some really fascinating ideas about, well, nature's laws.
Uh-huh.
We're going to explore how everything in nature is connected, like a giant web.
Right.
You pull on one strand,
Yeah,
and the whole thing kind of ripples.
exactly.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Like,
Yeah.
imagine introducing a new plant to an area,
Right.
a plant that's not from there.
Yeah.
It can change everything.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
soil, the bugs,
Great.
even the birds.
Yeah.
We've got this handbook as our guide today. It's called Branches, Bell Curves, and Beyond.
It's really all about those basic laws,
Right.
the ones that control how things grow in nature, how they spread out, how they all balance each other.
So we're going to break it all down for you today. How nature works, why it matters,
Yeah.
and what's really cool is how it affects us.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Okay, so you were saying the book starts with interconnectedness.
Yeah, that's kind of the foundation, the idea that everything in nature is linked.
Yeah.
And when something changes in one part of that web,
Yeah.
it can have these huge effects on other parts. Sometimes we don't even see them coming.
I was fascinated by some of the examples in the book, like predator and prey relationships, how they can shift whole ecosystems.
Right, they're classic examples.
And that thing with the algae in coral reefs.
Yeah, the symbiosis there.
They need each other to survive. It's incredible.
It is.
Oh, and then there's that example of how cutting down the rainforest,
Deforestation.
yeah, the Amazon, how that can actually change weather patterns, like on the other side of the world.
Global impact. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Humans are part of this web too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're not separate from it at all.
Okay.
What we do affects the ecosystems around us,
Uh-huh.
and those ecosystems affect us right back.
Whoa, that's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
Mhm.
It makes you realize how important it is to take care of the planet.
Exactly. Sustainable living, conservation efforts.
Mhm.
Those are crucial now more than ever.
That's what I love about this handbook. It's not just about understanding nature for the sake of it.
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to, solve real-world problems.
It's about solutions.
Yeah, and inspiring us to live more sustainably.
Yeah. Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive. There's so much more to uncover.
It's really amazing how these natural laws are like woven into everything.
It really is. And, this next section in the book gets into specific examples. It starts with branching patterns.
Oh, yeah. We talked about trees and rivers, even our blood vessels.
Right. But the handbook goes deeper, connecting it to math.
You mean like fractals? Those crazy patterns that go on forever?
Mm.
I've always found those so cool, but I never really thought about them in nature.
Once you see it everywhere. Think about a fern. Each little part is like a mini version of the whole plant.
Whoa, that's wild.
And then if you zoom in even closer on one of those tiny fronds, you see that same branching pattern again and again.
So it's like those Russian dolls, but with plants.
Exactly. It's called self-similarity, and it's what makes fractals so fascinating. It's this really efficient way to pack a lot of complexity into a small space. That's why mathematicians love them.
So nature found this one design that works really well, and it just uses it over and over.
Exactly. From tiny structures to huge ones.
So it's not just ferns, right?
Nope. Coastlines, mountains, snowflakes, even lightning. The book even talks about how this fractal geometry applies to ideas.
Wait, how can an idea be fractal?
Well, think about knowledge. It starts with a basic idea, and then people explore different parts of it, and that leads to more specific areas of study. And within each of those areas, you get even more branching.
So it's like a huge knowledge tree with all the branches and twigs representing different areas of study.
Perfect analogy. This fractal way of knowledge growing lets us keep exploring without losing sight of how everything connects.
It's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Every new discovery leads to more questions.
That's the beauty of it. And the handbook says that thinking in this fractal way can actually help us solve problems.
Okay, I'm curious. How does knowing about fractals help us in real life? It still seems kind of abstract to me.
Let's think about designing transportation networks. Instead of building roads in straight lines, we can use fractal ideas to make networks that adapt better to changes.
So we could design roads that branch out like rivers or blood vessels to handle traffic better.
Exactly. By using that fractal geometry, we can make networks that are better at dealing with, like accidents or traffic jams.
It's like designing a city that can breathe, expanding and contracting without getting totally choked up.
I like that. And we can use this fractal thinking for all sorts of things, from solar panels to managing resources.
This is amazing. It's crazy how something that seems so abstract can be so useful.
I know, right? And remember that bell curve we talked about, the one that seems to pop up everywhere?
Yeah, the one that shows up in everything from how tall people are to how much rain we get.
Well, the handbook says this familiar bell shape is key to understanding natural limits.
Now that you mention it, I can kind of see how those two things connect, but I'd love to hear you break it down.
Okay, so the bell curve, or the normal distribution, shows how most data points tend to cluster around the average.
Right.
Fewer and fewer are found at the extremes. It's a common pattern because so many things in nature are affected by random stuff.
So that's why most people are average height with only a few really tall or really short folks.
Exactly. And the same pattern works for lots of things in nature, like how resources are spread out.
Okay, I get that. But how does that tie into limits?
Imagine some animals that need a specific kind of food. Let's say the amount of that food in different places follows a bell curve.
So some areas have a ton of food, some have barely any, and most fall somewhere in between.
Right. Now the animals are going to go where the food is, right?
Makes sense? Got to eat to survive.
But here's the thing, as more animals go to those areas,
Yeah.
the competition gets tougher. And eventually there's not enough food even in the places where it was plentiful at first.
Ah, I see. So the way resources are spread out, plus the animal's instinct to go to the best spots, creates a natural limit on how big the population can get.
You got it. It's a natural way to stop overconsumption and keep things balanced.
It's like a high-stakes game of musical chairs. Miss a seat, and you might not make it.
Exactly. That's why knowing these patterns is crucial for managing resources and protecting all the different life forms out there.
It's like setting off on a road trip without checking the gas stations or the traffic. You could end up stranded.
You got it. We've got to understand the limits if we want to work within them.
But it's not all about limitations, right? Nature is really good at adapting and bouncing back.
That's true. The handbook emphasizes adaptation as the key to resilience.
It's like nature is always experimenting, always trying new things, and evolving to survive the challenges.
It's a great way to think about it.
Like chameleons changing color to blend in, or bats using echolocation to see in the dark.
Those are amazing adaptations, yeah. And there are countless others, from plants in the desert to animals with unique ways to communicate.
So what's the takeaway here? Are we supposed to learn from these adaptations and use them for our own problems?
That's exactly what the handbook suggests. It wants us to see nature not just as something to be amazed by, but as a source of inspiration.
So it's like nature has been doing research and development for billions of years, and we're finally starting to pay attention.
I love that. That's what biomimicry is all about.
Oh yeah, biomimicry. That's where we get ideas from nature to solve our problems, right?
Exactly. And it's already led to some incredible innovations. Remember Velcro? The guy who invented it got the idea from those little burrs that stick to your clothes.
So a simple burr led to Velcro. Wow.
Yeah.
What else does the book talk about?
Well, there's the design of wind turbine blades. Engineers have been looking at the shape of humpback whale fins, which are incredibly efficient. They noticed that those bumps on the fins, called tubercles, actually reduce drag and noise.
Wait, so those bumps can make wind turbines better? That's wild. It really does seem like nature is giving us the answers.
Right. Biomimicry isn't just about copying shapes, though. It's about understanding why those designs work so well in the first place.
So it's not just about mimicking a bird's wing, it's about understanding the aerodynamics that make it fly.
Exactly. It's about digging deeper to figure out the science behind nature and then applying that to human problems.
This is making me realize how much potential there is in this approach. We can learn so much from nature's billions of years of evolution. It's like a massive library of knowledge that we're just starting to explore.
Exactly. And biomimicry can be applied to all kinds of fields, from architecture to medicine to agriculture.
Give me some examples. How is it being used in all those areas?
Well, some architects are designing buildings based on termite mounds. Termite mounds are amazing at regulating temperature and airflow.
So they're making buildings that can naturally stay cool. That's awesome.
Yep. And in materials science, they're making super strong materials based on spider silk.
Which is already stronger than steel, right?
Pound for pound, yeah.
It sounds like we're moving into a whole new era of design where nature is leading the way.
That's what's so exciting. And the handbook even talks about how this biomimicry thinking can be applied to how we organize our societies.
Wait, hold on. How can we possibly mimic nature's organization?
Think about a forest. It's so diverse and complex, with all these different species interacting and working together to keep things balanced and healthy.
So maybe instead of trying to control everything from the top down, we can learn from how nature organizes itself.
That's one way to look at it. It's about sharing power and making decisions in a way that's more adaptable, just like a forest.
It's like tapping into the collective intelligence of a whole ecosystem.
That's a great way to put it. And the handbook suggests that this could help us create societies that are more sustainable and fair, better able to handle the challenges of today's world.
This is all super inspiring, but how do we take all these big ideas and turn them into action? Like, how can I start using these natural laws in my own life and community?
That's a great question, and the book has some answers. It starts with observation.
Observation. That sounds easy enough, but what exactly should we be looking for?
Just take some time to really pay attention to the nature around you, notice the patterns, relationships, how things interact with each other, and their environment.
So it's like becoming a nature detective, looking for clues and trying to figure out nature's secret language.
That's a fun way to think about it. The more you observe, the more you'll start to see those underlying principles we've been talking about, that interconnectedness and balance.
It's like we're learning to see the world through nature's eyes.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm ready to try this out. What are some easy ways to start?
Think about how you use things. Can you be more efficient and lessen your impact on the environment?
Like turning off lights, taking shorter showers, using reusable bags. I'm already trying to do those things.
Those are all great. It's about understanding that everything we do has consequences and trying to lighten our footprint.
So it's about being aware of our place in that web of life. We're all connected.
Right.
But how can we go beyond individual actions and create real change in our society?
That's the big question. The handbook says we need to shift away from always wanting more and towards a more equal partnership with nature.
So instead of seeing ourselves as the bosses of the planet, we need to see ourselves as part of the ecological community.
Exactly.
That requires a big change in how we think and what we value.
Right. It's like we need to upgrade our operating system, go from a me-first model to an eco-first model.
I like that. But how do we actually change those values and priorities?
That's where it gets tricky, but also exciting. The book says we should apply those same biomimicry ideas to how we run our economies and governments.
So we're talking about systems that are as efficient and resilient as a forest? That's a huge goal.
It is. It means moving away from the old ways of taking from the earth without giving back.
So instead of just using up resources, we need to focus on using them wisely, reusing them, and recycling them.
Exactly. It's a closed loop system.
Yeah.
And that means we have to design things differently.
So instead of making things that we throw away, we make things that last and can be fixed or recycled.
That's the idea. Imagine products that can be easily taken apart so we can reuse the parts.
It's like nature's composting system where nothing goes to waste.
Exactly. And we can do that for clothes, electronics, buildings, cars, everything.
This is making me realize that working within limits doesn't stop innovation, it makes it better.
That's right. It's not just about redesigning things, though. It's also about changing our values.
So instead of wanting more and more stuff, we start valuing quality over quantity, things that last, and experiences over possession.
Exactly. It's about changing what we consider wealth and success.
This is really making me think differently about what a good life really means. But how do we take this idea of embracing limits and apply it to big systems like the economy?
That's where things get interesting on a bigger scale. The handbook says we need to move away from constantly wanting more economic growth.
Towards what's called a steady state economy, right?
You got it. It focuses on keeping things stable, not just growing bigger and bigger.
So it's about finding that balance point, right? Where
Mhm.
people can thrive without hurting the planet.
Right. It's a big change from what we're used to, but the book says it's the only way to be truly sustainable.
Okay, but what would that actually look like? What needs to change?
Resource management would be huge. We'd need to stop just taking resources and start using them more like nature does.
Using things more efficiently, reusing them, recycling them, like a closed loop.
Exactly. And that means we need to design things differently.
Like we were saying before,
Mm-hmm.
making things that can be fixed or recycled.
Right. Think of it like nature's composting system. Everything breaks down and becomes food for something else.
That's a great way to think about it.
And we can apply that to so many industries. The possibilities are huge.
This is so inspiring. It's like a whole new world opening up.
That's the beauty of it. The handbook isn't just about limits. It's about recognizing all the opportunities that come with living more sustainably.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Interconnectedness, biomimicry, embracing limits. What's the big takeaway, the final message from this book?
Well, there's one last key idea, one that often gets overlooked, and it might be the most thought-provoking one of all. The power of embracing limits.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. We've been exploring these amazing ideas about how nature works, how it's all connected, and how we can learn from it.
Right. We've talked about how interconnected everything is, how nature adapts and finds solutions, and even how we can mimic those solutions for our own challenges.
And now we're getting to this really interesting idea, this concept of limits.
Yeah, it's a big one, and it might seem kind of backwards at first.
It does a little bit. Like, why would we want to embrace limits? Shouldn't we always be striving for more, for bigger and better?
That's what we're often told, yeah.
Hmm.
But this section of the handbook challenges that idea, suggests that maybe there's more to it than just constant growth.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, think about it. Nature doesn't operate that way. Everything in nature has limits.
Right, we talked about carrying capacity, how an ecosystem can only support so many organisms.
Exactly. There's only so much food, so much space, so many resources to go around.
And the book is saying that our civilization is kind of hitting those limits too, right?
Yeah, we've been living under this idea of unlimited growth, but our planet is finite. It has boundaries.
We can't just keep using up resources and expanding forever.
Yeah.
At some point, something's got to give.
Right, and we're starting to see those consequences now. Climate change, resource depletion, social unrest.
Like a giant wake-up call, right?
Exactly.
Right.
We need to recognize these limits and figure out a more sustainable way to live. But here's the thing. The book doesn't just present limits as a problem.
Okay.
It reframes them as opportunities.
Opportunities.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, think about it this way. If there are no limits, if resources are unlimited,
Yeah.
there's no real reason to be efficient or innovative, right?
You can just keep doing things the same old way, even if it's wasteful.
Exactly. It's like having an unlimited budget. Why bother trying to be creative or save money? But when you have constraints, when you have to work within certain limits,
Yeah.
it forces you to think differently.
To find new solutions.
Right. It pushes you to be more creative and more sustainable.
It's like those cooking shows where they give the chefs a bunch of weird ingredients and they have to come up with a delicious meal. The limits force them to be more creative.
Exactly. And nature is full of examples like that. Take bird flight. Birds didn't just magically start flying. They evolved over millions of years. They had to overcome the limits of gravity, air resistance, and energy constraints.
And those limits actually shape their evolution,
Right.
push them to become these incredibly efficient flying machines.
That's right. The book says that we can do the same thing. By working within the limits of our planet, we can find new and better ways to do things.
So instead of seeing limits as roadblocks, we can see them as design challenges, prompts that force us to think outside the box.
Exactly. Constraints can be the catalyst for innovation.
This is really making me think differently about progress and what it means to succeed.
Right, and the book offers some practical ways to put this idea into action. One big one is to shift away from consumerism.
From always wanting more and more stuff.
Right. It's about embracing a more minimalist approach.
So instead of always striving for more, we can find happiness in having enough.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that real wealth isn't about stuff. It's about experiences, relationships, and purpose.
You can't buy happiness, we all know that, but do we really live by it?
That's the challenge. Studies have shown that after a certain point, having more things doesn't make us happier. It can actually lead to more stress and a feeling of emptiness.
So by consuming less, by simplifying our lives, we can actually be happier.
The book argues that yes, we can. And this minimalist approach is good for the planet, too.
When we consume less, we use fewer resources and create less waste.
Right. It's a win-win. What about bigger systems, like our economy?
How can we apply this idea of embracing limits to something as big as the economy?
Well, the book suggests that we need to rethink our current economic model, which is based on endless growth.
Right. Always needing more, bigger, faster.
Exactly. It's not sustainable in the long run. What we need is a steady state economy.
I've heard that term, but can you explain it?
It's an economy that focuses on maintaining balance rather than constant growth.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where humans and nature can both thrive.
Exactly. It's a big change from what we're used to, but it's necessary.
Okay, so what would it look like to transition to this steady state economy?
Well, resource management would be key. We'd need to shift from a take make waste model to a circular model.
So instead of just using up resources, we focus on using them efficiently, reusing them, recycling them.
Right, like nature's composting system. Everything breaks down and becomes food for something else.
No waste.
Exactly. And we can apply that to so many industries. Imagine clothes and electronics designed to be easily disassembled and recycled.
That's amazing.
It is, but it's not just about redesigning things, it's about changing our values.
Valuing quality over quantity, experiences over possessions.
Exactly. It's about aligning our values with a more sustainable way of life.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. It's really opened my eyes to new possibilities and a new way of thinking about the world.
I'm glad to hear that. These natural laws aren't just abstract ideas, they're a blueprint for a better future.
So let's remember that less can be more, limits can be opportunities, and by working with nature, not against it, we can create a thriving and balanced future for everyone.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.